How would Ultimate Kars handle the universe of Warhammer 40k? Short answer, yes. Long answer, oh boy. The universe of Warhammer 40k is dark, gory, carnage and slaughter manifest to the utmost extreme. It is basically the perfect universe to put any character into it to see if they could survive. Now, what does it take to survive in this universe? A lot. It takes a lot, and that's not me joking. It takes an awful lot to survive in this universe. If you're not a super powered human, good luck. You got about 15 hours of living on a battlefield. Aliens, demons, muties, anything you can think of, it's on the battlefield with you, and it is trying to kill you at all times. It is the perfect galactic battle arena royale for some of your favorite characters in fiction. In a universe that's constantly changing, adapting, and getting worse and worse for you at any given point, in my opinion, I think it's perfect for the ultimate life form, Kars. What better way to test his title as the ultimate life form within the ultimate universe of war and chaos? Let's find out. And by the way, hello, my name is Metas. Walk with me. So the structure of this video is going to be very similar to my Batman video I did before this video. A lot of people do like kind of the half storytelling, half power scaling / kind of almost an analysis of a question like this. So I'll kind of keep that theme running here. However, thanks to the Bible's worth of information Warhammer has about its lore, I will be generalizing over the story bits and kind of just getting to the point of it all and what I would think would happen if Kars interacted with any of these factions. So sorry if I don't bring up a super minor point that was mentioned in one book at the bottom of the page that says that I'm wrong, or that I don't bring up a super important character that no one's ever heard of that could possibly change this entire scenario. So in the future, I'm sorry, but I'm trying to make this entertaining for everybody, new and old. And to speak personally about it, I'm much more interested in the main character and major character interactions that could take place here, as it leads into a lot of interesting character interactions and what ifs. As Warhammer versus videos kind of miss that point because I think the universe and the world building and the lore make characters outside of their verse kind of have to question things. It's like almost like they have to give an answer to all this chaos that is around them. And when talking about the ultimate life form who has a 400 IQ, I think he's going to be questioning a lot of things, and I genuinely like that. While on the surface level, these franchises can seem pretty distant from each other, when you look at their core themes, they're both wacky stories about the indomitable human spirit taking place over a long period of time, involving some massive family drama. And Jesus, I told you they're both wacky. Well, with that all being said and me being the bridge between these two communities, let's hop into this discussion. So the question I'm guessing a lot of Warhammer fans are probably asking right now is, who is Ultimate Kars? And for the JoJo fans that are probably going to get confused later on, who is Novel Kars? Well, 100,000 years before the events of Part 1 Phantom Blood of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Ultimate Kars, or just at this time, Kars, was born. Descending from the species of Pillermen, located in Mexico, he and his species would be considered the top predatory life form within the area. However, they had one downside. They were extremely nocturnal hunters, to such a point to where if they were exposed to sunlight, they would turn into stone. Kars hated this. He hated how he was being conquered by the sun, that he had limitations. But Kars was no regular Pillerman. He was a genius among his race, and using his intellect would make the first stone mask. However, it would be a failure. While he would transcend the limitations of his current species, he would not conquer the sun, as the stone mask he made did not pierce farther enough into his skull to give him the full potential of his brain. He needed something more. What he needed was a Super Aja stone. In tandem with the stone mask, the spikes of the stone mask could pierce farther enough into Kars' skull, giving him the ultimate power he so desired. However, when his race found out he was doing this, they went out to kill him. And I mean everybody came out to kill him, even his own parents. And in a single night with him and his best friend, AC/DC, would slaughter his entire people, only leaving 2 children behind, Wamu and Santana, on top of the stone mask, which humans would find later, leading to the generational conflict between Dio Brando and the Joestars, as the mask, when placed upon a human, can make vampires. And of course, Dio Brando used that to make himself into a vampire. Over the next 100,000 years, Kars would be eternally looking for the stone, slaughtering man, vampire alike, even eventually fighting a special kind of people who had the ability to replicate the breathing of the sun. They would be formidable, but of course Kars and group would end up defeating them, but but they would eventually come back to bite him in the ass. After a couple thousand years of more slumbering, while waiting for the stone to eventually pop up, Joseph Joestar would enter the party, and over the course of a few months, Joseph, the descendant of Hamon Masters, would battle against Kars and the other Pillermen constantly. But by the end of part 2 Battle Tendency, Kars would achieve his lifelong goal, becoming the ultimate life form. On top of that, he has all the abilities of a Pillerman, vampire, human, and any creature found on Earth concurrently at their peak, if not higher, with the added bonus of being able to integrate himself with technology. He was able to do that in George Joestar. It's just a little added bonus. However, in a twist of fate, and I mean quite literally in a twist of fate, as fate in JoJo's is real and plays a massive part within the universe's world building, he would be launched into space using the Redstone and Joseph's genius, or luck, depending on how you see it. While in space, Kars could do nothing, and over time began not to think anymore, damned to drift in the void of space till the end of time. However, thanks to alternative JoJo media officially published, this is not where Kars' story ends. While in the original JoJo manga, we never got to see the full potential of the ultimate life form, within George Joestar, we do. After 10 quadrillion years and the universe constantly resetting and resetting every time at the end of the universe, Kars, the ultimate life form, still lives on, among other versions of Ultimate Kars, as the ultimate life form cannot die. Living on Mars with the multiple versions of himself, Kars devises a plan to get back to Earth using his own body, or bodies, to get back, by making a spaceship out of them. I know it sounds crazy, just roll with it, that's not the most wild thing in this book. But during this plan, he meets Joji Joestar, who introduces him to the world of stands and what's been going on Earth for the last 10 quadrillion years, or at least this current version of Earth. By the end of the novel, Kars is shown to be an absolute monster, having the ability to travel forwards through time infinitely, or travel backwards in time, or the ability to stop time, or having the ability to understand anything with under a few minutes. Being so smart that the only thing that can beat him is quite literally plot armor the ability, aka the author himself. That is not hyperbole. We'll go more in depth throughout this video about his powers as we continue, but I'll save some of the novel stuff, or at least the bigger novel stuff, for the end of the video, as the cards we'll use for this video is just a early stage George Joestar version, which is very similar to the part 2 counterpart, who doesn't have any of his wacky stand abilities, but does have the ability to learn anything, given enough time. But when it comes to this version of Kars' scaling, it's not too complex yet, because all you're really doing is scaling off of characters like Jotaro and Dio from part 3 Stardust Crusaders. Since Kars has every living ability concurrently, and Dio was alive around Kars' awakening to his ultimate power, Kars and Dio should be at least relativistically similar to each other, if not Kars surpassing Dio. So what does his overall stats look like? Well, when it comes to attack potency and durability, scaling off the stand the Sun, which Silver Chariot had fought during Stardust Crusaders, as it was able to light up the entire Sahara Desert, and then proceeded to shoot out concentrated laser beams at Silver Chariot, the AP scaling here should be roughly around large town level to almost at the maximum you could really get to is like island level. I just go with mountain or large city level, as I think it's a pretty mid-bald area you can use here. How this goes back into Dio and Jotaro, that is that Jotaro is just outright stated to be stronger than Silver Chariot. So this feat that Silver Chariot was able to do here should be easily replicated by Jotaro and Star Platinum. Dio then proceeds to say in his fight against Jotaro that him and Jotaro are pretty comparable, but Jotaro is slightly weaker than him. And then later on in the fight, Dio eventually gets stronger. This scaling here just more or less confirms the fact that both Jotaro and Dio are around that large city mountain level in terms of AP and durability, as they're both able to output this energy and are able to survive it. All coming back to Ultimate Life Form Kars being able to replicate this because he is the ultimate life form, when at least one of these characters was around and had the potential to reach that level. And no, I didn't forget about the speed scaling. This one's actually pretty easy. Regular Pillermen Kars was able to react to light way before he ended up becoming the ultimate life form, so you could easily say he is as fast as light, if not faster now, because he's the ultimate life form. However, thanks to old Joseph being in Stardust Crusaders and being able to outreact a Star Platinum who is confirmed to be massively faster than light within multiple data book guides, we can confirm that the ultimate life form Kars scales to old Joseph and should be easily FTL plus to massively faster than light plus. So this is the scaling we're looking at with this early novel version of the character we will be using. And shocker to the JoJo fans, Warhammer fans that know, that scaling's really not that impressive. So with that all being said, how does the ultimate life form handle the 40k universe?
It is the 41st millennium. For more than 100 years, the Emperor Emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of Earth. He's the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and master of a million worlds by the might of his inexhaustible armies. He is a rotting carcass, writhing visibly with the power of the dark age of technology. He is the carrion lord of the Imperium, for whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day so that he may never truly die. Yet in his deathless state, the Emperor continues his eternal vigilance. Vast armies give battle in his name on uncounted worlds, but for all their multitudes, they are barely enough to hold off the ever-present threat of aliens, heretics, mutants, and worse. Forget the promise of progress and understanding, for in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. There is no peace among the stars, only an eternity of carnage, slaughter, and the laughter of ever-thirsty gods. But now, the manifestation of the ultimate life form warps the status quo of this red millennium of mankind.
So generalizing and not going too crazy in the finer details, as I'm talking about a lot of factions here and I'm trying to keep it very neat and organized and in no real particular order, how would Kars deal with the Imperium of Mankind? And how would his overall character affect them? Well, in terms of a fight, the Imperium of Mankind can kill Kars. However, they're not common ways of killing him. What I mean by that is the equipment they are using is kind of rare to find on the battlefield. You're basically looking at high-end or extremely heavy laser weapons, melta weapons, and plasma weapons, capable of instantly destroying a creature or an enemy almost instantly without leaving a trace. Why that's important is because if a single cell of Kars is left behind, he can come back, so you basically have to completely destroy him. But luckily, these higher end weapons are basically described as mini suns when they're firing out, so I do think these things could harm Kars. But it will be no regular man firing the trigger, as it would take probably high-level space marines to kill Kars, arguably an entire company's worth to actually take him down. Now, there is alternative ways to also kill him that don't require high-end weaponry and a lot of space marines. One of them being warp grenades, as they can completely atomize you and just kind of basically blink you out of existence thanks to the warp. The next would be graviton cannons, in specific the higher end ones that can completely make people incapable of moving, just straight up killing them. Hellstorm cannons, which are able to wipe out entire cities with one shot, so if you fire enough at them at Kars, he will just straight up die. And of course, for the Warhammer fans who are saying it in the back, Exterminatus, just completely destroying a planet when it's too much of a hassle to actually fight on the ground. So yeah, the Imperium of Mankind can definitely defeat Kars. However, it's not going to be an easy fight, as you would end up using a lot of extreme resources. Not to mention the fact that depending on how long this takes to actually take notice of Kars, Kars might end up adapting to the universe right then and there, so he could become a psyker, he could eventually figure out how all the equipment works and is able to kind of finagle his way out of it. So yeah, it's kind of an extremely difficult fight if you're not using like named characters or anybody like crazy like any of the Primarchs. So yeah, Kars can probably end up fighting the Imperium of Mankind for a while, if not surviving, depending on the scenario. So moving forward, how would Kars interact with the Imperium of Mankind? Well, in my opinion, it's really honestly fascinating, and probably, I'm gonna be honest, the main reason why I wanted to make this video. Kars, even within the original material in part 2 and the novel, always kind of suggests that Kars is always just trying to look for new information to munch on, always constantly growing and adapting and changing over time, just like the creature that he is, as he represents all of Earth's life. And now with a massive amount of unknown information being presented to him, Kars is gonna go crazy for it. Now, I don't know how long it would take, but at some point, somebody's gonna notice a giant 8-foot man with a lot of weird biological powers snooping around places he shouldn't be snooping. So conflict would end up arising. So I think at one point, Space Marines are gonna end up showing up. Kars is just gonna be like, hey, I'm really smart. I don't wanna fight you. I've been doing this all week. Can we just talk? As his character trait is pretty normal with novel Kars, as he just wants to figure out things. So he will ask questions if he can. And I really don't think they have a choice here, as none of their normal equipment is going to kill Kars, so they have to make him a prisoner or a prisoner of war. From this point onward, it gets really interesting. At some point, somewhere in the leadership command chain, someone will take interest at the super genius with a lot of powers that is not connected to chaos, Tyranids, orcs, or any enemy of the Imperium. passing with flying colors under imprisonment. And the only reason why Kars is doing this is the easy route. Kars definitely knows this. So probably at one point, probably a chapter master, we'll just say the Ultramarines just to make it easy for us, tests Kars even further. And of course he passes with flying colors. With a weapon like this on their side, I think at one point Guilliman will take notice of this. And this is what Kars has been planning for the entire time. Because with Guilliman liking him, or a Primarch liking him, or somebody of very, very high status liking him, Kars can engage with any knowledge he wants to get infinitely stronger within this universe. Kars would also probably end up forming a pretty good relationship with Guilliman, because the more intelligent and the more interesting you are, the more interested in Kars will be with you, as shown with George Joestar, with Joji. On the other side of that conversation, Guilliman would end up gaining somebody with a massive amount of knowledge, being able to help him through basically anything. He'd be able to fight on the ground with Space Marines, he'd be able to analyze any war tactic and be able to perfect it to make it even better for less casualties. He'd be able to criticize any other form of government because Kars is just smarter than everybody, and I'm going to be totally honest, the Inquisition and the Mechanicum are really honestly dumb at some points. They make a lot of stupid decisions, but that's the nature of Grim Dark, and Guilliman even kind of knows that to a certain degree. So having somebody just basically call it out with him would be honestly a pretty good boon for Guilliman. Overall, Kars would change the fate of many worlds and many battles over the course of centuries, help changing the Imperium for the better like the Emperor wanted, the burden that Guilliman has. And since we're speaking about the Emperor, let's talk about this conversation with the Imperium of Man. Could Kars somehow, through his manipulation of genetics, bring back the Emperor? Well, it's not zero. You see, Kars can become a Psyker. Since Psyker abilities are genetic, Kars in theory can become one of the most powerful Psykers within the entire universe, even surpassing that of Magnus and other characters as well. Why? Well, it's just because that's how it works. Kars will always find a way to become the strongest through genetics or adaptation. So if you know where I'm going with this, lock in. The Emperor of Mankind was made in two specific ways. One, he was just born that powerful and has lived for hundreds of thousands of centuries. Or two, he is man-made. And with that case, if he is man-made, Kars can't adapt to it because it's kind of out of the realm of being natural, as that's his one downside with his abilities, as he can't learn things that are not natural in quotation marks. But if the Emperor is naturally born, that means there is a person either with the second most powerful psycho abilities in the entire universe, or now the first. The realm of possibilities is gargantuan now. The Emperor can be possibly saved now. The Chaos Gods have an entirely new threat to behold, and all the other races are now cowering in fear, probably. Kars would be way too useful for the Imperium, dude. It's insane what he can do for them. And if he did gain a power-up like that, he'd end up going from like, at most a chapter master to a lower mid-level Primarch to just basically being one of the strongest characters in the verse with a power-up like that. So let's move on with the Tau. So when it comes to a versus fight with them, it's not looking good for Kars. So do you remember all the high-end weaponry the Imperium of Man has that can potentially end Kars? Okay, so get this. The Tau have that, right? But more casually. They have high-end ion weapons that will completely vaporize you. They have, I think it's pronounced Arcanons, A-R-K-A cannons, basically the same difference, that can basically atomize Kars. They have fusion cannons, fusion blades, fusion torches that pose a high threat to Kars given enough range. Plasma weapons better than the Imperium of Mankind to have the fury of a supernova behind every shot, or a small sun like the Imperium of Mankind. And to boot, pulse weapons that are just plasma weapons but even better. If the Tau were pissed off for whatever reason that day and Kars has just shown up within the universe with no knowledge or anything, he's cooked. He's gonna get cocky for 1 second because that's in his nature. He does do that a few times and he does kind of want to test his abilities every so often, shown in George Joestar and a little bit of the original manga. So the Tau can kill him. It's entirely possible. It's not out of the realm of possibilities. It's basically just like the tabletop game. They will kill you because they are the range class. However, that's not how the Tau operate, because they're more like, hey, come join us, because that's just how we operate. Just like, we're not going to kill you on sight because that's kind of fucked up. And since Kars is always looking for knowledge to gain, and the Tau have a lot of it between a lot of different races, I think Kars would love this place a lot. So it's basically the Imperium of Man scenario again, however at like 4 times speed. The Tau are going to become extremely overpowered by the end of this, and more likely than not, Kars will probably end up becoming a Psyker again, so yeah, the Tau are going to be really, really overpowered if they find him first. Overall, in this scenario, there could be a high chance that if Ultimate Kars finds out like the Tau higher-ups, which are kind of corrupted a little bit, are not to Kars' liking, Ultimate Kars here could eventually end up like becoming Tau leader if he wanted to. It's possible. He could end up dying in that process, but with enough information gathering, he could find weaknesses and probably could win in the end, possibly. Now, moving on to the Orcs. This is where it's gonna get funny. So the Orcs are smart, kind of. So technically speaking, there are some ways the Orcs could harm Kars. By the Imperium of Man standards, the Orcs are a bit of a nuisance. They do pose somewhat of a threat, but they're always just kind of on the thorns of everybody else's sides. The only thing that would cause Kars trouble here would be their macro cannons that are somewhat better than the Imperium's, kind of, sort of, and just their sheer amount of numbers and the fact that they can reproduce so much. And because they can do that, they can make attack moons. But what is an attack moon? Well, an attack moon is just a massive orc structure that is so massive, its physics are similar to a planet, which cause gravitational distortion. So yeah, they're a bit weird. They're kind of treated as a nuisance, but at times they can be an extremely powerful threat. Sometimes they can have subpar equipment, the other times the Imperium starts sweating a little bit. But of course, since we're talking about the Orcs, I have to talk about the meme. If they believe it, it becomes real. This is technically half true, but technically half wrong. While they are a highly psychic race that can heavily affect the warp, that can heavily affect reality if a lot of people believe in it, that being the Orcs in this case, and whatever they think becomes real, that power does have its limitations. That goes for all races, but in specific with the Orcs might just actually be really smart, but they don't know it themselves. It all comes down to genetics for them, as it's believed that the old ones, like really old race in Warhammer 40k, basically made them for cannon fodder, so if they were self-replicating to the point where they can breed a lot into existence more orcs to fight, on top of the fact that they can make their own machine equipment on a genetic level and know how to build, they'd be extremely useful. It's kind of similar to a bird. A bird just knows how to build a nest, so an orc just knows how to build any machine equipment when needed, but they don't chalk it up to their instincts, they chalk it up to just the color of whatever they're trying to make. A car will go faster if it's colored red. So what would happen if Kars met them and some type of interaction happened between them? Well, in my opinion, it'd probably either go two ways. Either one, Kars is going to figure out how their entire society works in one go and end up becoming like the god orc among all of them just because he just was able to outsmart all of them, or B, just leave. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I don't think Kars is really gonna find the orcs fascinating for more than like 10 minutes. But if he did stay with them and eventually ended up learning Psyker powers there, he could honestly become a massive threat with the orcs behind him. So interesting, but I don't think it's a very plausible scenario. I think genuinely outside of the Psyker abilities they have, potentially, they would just be like really boring to Kars, gonna be honest. So with that out of the way, let's move on to the Eldar. Basically space elves, but replace the magic with Psyker powers, but like really crazy Psyker powers, like borderline, like it's basically magic. So how would Kars fight them? Well, they do have some standard equipment like the Imperium of Man with their high-end laser weapons that could cause Kars a little bit of harm, but where the real threat is with their dire swords, witchblades, and higher-end Psyker abilities that could pose a Kars with no experience a lot of trouble. Why all of these are a threat is because they attack the soul, and of course Psyker energy. So we can make the case here to say that Kars could end up just dying instantly because, well, he doesn't really have a lot of like soul hack resistances and such, but stands are weird, and he has been able to interact with stands within George Joestar in a pretty unique way. So this is kind of like 50-50. It's either A, he could resist some of their soul hack abilities, but on the other hand, just straight up die. However, he wouldn't go out like instantaneously. He would go out swinging. A lot of Eldar would die like per usual within the actual franchise. So yeah, sucks for the Eldar because they don't reproduce very fast. But how would an actual interaction between these two go down? Well, in my opinion, it's a bit weird because at first I thought they would have been like homies because they're both highly intelligent species, or species and then an entity, collaborating with each other. But then I had to think about it for a bit more, and I kind of think the Eldar would just leave Kars alone for the betterment of themselves, as they do with like every race in Warhammer 40k, unless provoked, which they're always being provoked, so they're always in war. So my line of thought is either two scenarios. either one, they help Kars because they see him as an intelligent species or entity, and they help him just because, you know, it's like, oh, it's smart on smart. Or two, they're like, no, screw off. We don't want to deal with you. Go to the Imperium of Mankind. We really don't want to waste the resources here. Unless we're talking about the alternative Eldari, which, well, in that case, Kars is going to have to throw hands with all of them because they are all insane. Even with a scenario where they do end up helping Kars because they see him as intelligent, I think at the end of the day, they'll just push him towards the Imperium of Mankind because the Eldar are kind of allies with the Imperium of Man, even though they're like, kill the Xenos, but they're like, yeah, the Eldar are in a fishy area. They're kind of okay. So at the end of the day, it'll just end up leading back into the Imperium of Man situation, but just a lot faster. Moving on with the Tyranids. Now, this is a matchup I know people have been waiting for, the ultimate life form versus the ultimate life form. Now, in terms of power, what does the Tyranid hive mind bring to the table? Well, not a lot in terms of like weaponry and stuff. There is stuff that can harm like your average space marine and of course your guardsman, but Kars isn't really being affected by any of that stuff as he can heal extremely fast. So just skipping towards what would actually happen within this fight, it would just really be adaptation versus sheer numbers. And just like within the actual Warhammer universe, it would just be a case of, okay, the Tyranids versus the orcs or chaos. They're fighting on a planet for hundreds of thousands of years. Somebody will come out on top, and it's just basically that. Who will end up winning? Well, it depends. Kars is extremely intelligent. He has a lot of powers, ultimate Hamon, every species that has lived on Earth concurrently. He has their powers and abilities within his body. The Tyranids have been able to adapt to orcs, psyker users, chaos. It's gonna be difficult here between these two. Genuinely, and just to be safe, I think it will end up in a tie. I genuinely also think I might need to make an entire video on this versus alone because it gets complex. The Tyranids can just adapt to really abstract things, and Kars has been shown to adapt and change with the times as he's able to integrate himself with technology. So he could also get pretty abstract with his abilities as well. So it's weird. I think this versus requires a much more in-depth discussion. But I would overall say it's adaptation versus adaptation. A never-ending stalemate would be my answer, just to be safe. So moving on to the Necrons. What happens here? No, just no. I don't think anybody expected Kars to win this. To actually talk about it in depth, the Necrons casually have antimatter weapons on some of their low-ranking fighters. An entire world's worth of Necrons would absolutely destroy Kars. I'm not even gonna talk about it, dog. These guys, I'll just throw it up on screen. The Necrons are so powerful when they awaken on their dead worlds, like zombies. The Imperium of Man doesn't even bother sending space marines down. They just get rid of the planet. The Necrons are a menace, dog. They are stupid overpowered. And the funny thing is, we don't even know the full capabilities of their powers. They're just kind of cropping up within Warhammer 40k, causing problems. And they might even have worse weaponry. They have more than antimatter weapons. It's dumb. Like, even in a story scenario, Kars is losing. Like, there's nothing here for Kars to win with. Like, he's a genius, but the Necrons are even smarter. So it's just all like, easy dub for the Necrons, I guess. Like, GG Kars. What is he gonna do against an antimatter weapon? I don't really know. Plus, also to mention, some Necrons are also unkillable. They'll just come back. So that's also a thing. I don't know what you want Kars to do here. He's creamed. Unless we're using like late game novel Kars powers, he is not winning. It is not even up for discussion. So moving on to Chaos. Now, remember what I said about the Imperium of Man being the reason why I ended up making this video? Yeah, that was a lie. I love it when a character from an alternative universe comes into Warhammer 40k and they have to interact with the Chaos gods, the dark gods, because it's always interesting to see if they are corruptible and were to go down a certain pathway. Now you got your flavors here. You got Khorne, the god of war, Nurgle, the god of death, Slaanesh, the god of pleasure, and Tzeentch, the god of change. So what we'll do here is we'll rank them from least corruptible to most corruptible to see if Kars falls. And pretty obvious to me, at the bottom would be Nurgle. You see, Kars' whole thing was to surpass death, to surpass basically any challenge in front of him, the biggest one being was the sun. So basically having the personification of death control you makes really no sense for the guy. Not to mention Kars contradicts Nurgle's entire existence itself. Going back to Kars' original clan, the reason why they attacked him was because he was messing with the natural order with the universe. The ultimate life form breaks the chain of life. A being that can never die requires infinite amount of energy to exist, meaning that everything would die in the process, meaning that all life would be ruined. And with no life means perpetual death. But Nurgle requires the cycle of life and death to continue in order for him to exist. So basically, it would be a massive conflict of interest. If anything, Nurgle and Kars would absolutely hate each other. And that's really just the end of it. They both represent something that, when they're in the same space with each other, just cannot coexist. They just wouldn't like each other. So moving forward from Nurgle, we enter Khorne. Now, this one actually makes a lot of sense here. Kars really isn't a big time fighter. While he does like to test his limits when the opportunity presents itself, it's really not Kars' motif, basically, is what I'm saying. However, Khorne would probably take an interest in Kars because, well, if you have somebody who can basically fight forever because he has infinite health and infinite stamina, he would be great for his side, for basically any conflict and just to make him perpetually stronger, as Khorne does not care where the blood flows as long as it's flowing. So yeah, I think it's kind of perfect. It just ends up landing in the middle for this kind of relationship. I don't think it would end up happening, but like it could only benefit one party, at least in the long run. So there you go. I think it's a kind of like just it's a perfect gray area, I think, personally speaking. However, the next two are extremely complex. We have Slaanesh and Tzeentch. So the reason why this is a hard choice to place these two is because of what they represent. Slaanesh, technically speaking here, also represents perfection, or the striving for perfection and reaching it, getting that dopamine rush, which Slaanesh is known for. While on the other side, Tzeentch represents ever constant change and adaptation and learning and power, especially magic, and always craving more knowledge. So we enter this space of obtaining perfection or near perfection and obtaining more continuously, which, shocker at this point if nobody gets it, Kars literally represents both. So I'm hoping you kind of see why it's hard to choose either one. I do have an answer, however I will preface before saying it. I'm 50-50 and I can switch on either side, but this is my current thinking. I think Tzeentch will corrupt Kars, or Kars will go up to Tzeentch's side. Why I say this is because Kars is already feeling like he's already achieved perfection. He's already the ultimate life form. Pillermen Kars might go to Slaanesh's side, but not novel Kars or ultimate Kars. Looking at the dialogue that's presented in George Joestar, Kars is really just feeling himself, always trying to constantly adapt to the new changing stands around him. Just change out stands for magic and it's just basically the same for the character. Plus, we can get pretty hyper specific. Kars never refers to himself as the perfect life form, just the ultimate life form, kind of implying there is never going to be perfection, as he will always continuously adapt, which is something that Tzeentch wants. So that's my line of reasoning. Now note, like I said before, it can change depending on your perspective of the ultimate life form. So a quick recap on Chaos and the Chaos Gods. I honestly overall think if we were to order them, it would go Nurgle, Khorne, Slaanesh, and Tzeentch. And it would be highly possible for Kars to join Chaos, as he really doesn't have any connection with any other faction, so he really wouldn't have a problem with Chaos. It might take some convincing to get him corrupted, but it's not zero. So that's how I think Kars would interact with the 40k universe, not at full power. Win some fights, lose others, gains allies, lose allies, becomes the strongest of whatever faction he's probably leading, and possibly can be corrupted. Overall, pretty good. Ultimate Kars actually does a pretty good job handling the 40k universe. However, we still need to answer one more thing. Full power novel Kars versus Warhammer 40k. What is that going to end up looking like? Well, let's talk about it. Late game novel Kars has a plethora of abilities that are just basically, even for JoJo standards, ridiculously overpowered. To briefly go over them, being the ultimate life form, of course, he has every species abilities and adaptation skills all wrapped up into one. He's also a Pillerman, a human, a vampire, a Hamon user, which just basically ends up saying he can't die, he's immortal, is extremely intelligent, having a 400 IQ, possibly even higher due to the fact that when he knew he couldn't beat somebody, it was because he knew the author was by his side, letting him win. That is not a joke. He has the ability to manipulate other people's bodies and even technology, which he is unfamiliar with. Moving on to his numerous amount of stands, a psychic construct of his own fighting will, in specific the ones that will actually be useful in this fight, starting off with Whitesnake Ultimate, which has the ability to remove your cognitive thought and spiritual powers, basically just leaving you as a meat puppet. Dune Ultimate has the ability to manipulate the sand or ground of an entire planet at the user's control. The World Ultimate having the ability to stop time on a universal scale for 1 whole hour. Sea Moon Ultimate Requiem has the ability to shift gravity in a multitude of ways, but primarily is used to basically invert somebody inside out, instantly killing them. Ultimate D4C. Its stand ability allows cars to travel through dimensions when placed in between 2 objects and crushed. And if you were to bring any objects from that dimension over to this one that are similar, if they collide, they will instantly explode, basically causing instant death if it's 2 people colliding. Also, if Kars were to be near death, even though he's technically immortal, he can pass on his consciousness to another Ultimate Kars thanks to Ultimate D4C. And finally, coming to his strongest stand, Made in Heaven Ultimate Requiem. It basically gives Ultimate Kars the ability to accelerate time for the entire universe until it reaches its endpoint, leading into the birth of a new universe. And a little bit of a bonus, he can also selectively choose something and basically age it until it turns into nothing. So yeah, extremely overpowered. So where does this version of Kars compare to the grander whole of Warhammer 40k? Well, depends on how you look at it. For the most part, nobody within the physical plane of existence really holds a candle to this version of Kars. He is just basically way too overpowered. His speed alone, thanks to Made in Heaven Ultimate Requiem, basically washes everybody. If you're not a high-level psyker or somebody imbued with chaos, you really don't stand a chance here, except for a few exceptions, as there are a few named characters that are a bit overpowered. But yeah, for the most part, the physical plane of existence really isn't challenging Kars. The only people that I think would actually honestly challenge Kars would be basically extremely rare psyker users, greater named demons, and demon princes. A pretty good comparison would be that of Angron. Angron is considered one of the stronger demon princes within the verse, and should be comparable to other demon princes like Magnus, who, well, depending on how you see the warp, either is a universal threat to an outer-versal threat. And both of these Primarchs have some impressive speed feats, being anywhere in FTL plus to possibly immeasurable thanks to the warp, as it ignores time, space, and distance. Now, comparing Novel Kars to that, he does have some impressive multiversal to universal feats. He once fell through an infinite shaft crossing universes at an infinite speed, tanking it and then slowly regenerating afterwards. He has also traveled back in time thanks to Killer Queen, a tool that he has now, by blowing himself up, resetting an hour back for quadrillions of years by speeding it up with also Made in Heaven Ultimate Requiem to get back to the first universe. And he had to travel through 36 other ones to get to that one. So easily a universal plus to a multiversal feat in terms of durability, and he has to fight people even stronger than that, so his AP would also be in that same category as well. So you're basically just looking at a demon prince in terms of power. However, if we ever were to fight in the warp, none of his time abilities would work there, so I'd say he's like a high to mid-tier demon prince in terms of Warhammer ranking. However, we are forgetting that Novel Kars can also adapt, and of course he can become a psyker. So depending on if you want to say he's just a really powerful psyker or on the level of the Emperor, you're basically looking at a demigod. The only people that would really challenge a version of Kars like this would be basically the Chaos Gods, which is extremely impressive. So you're just basically looking at the Emperor or somebody near that level. So overall, Kars' ending stats would be like 400 IQ, possibly higher, several ultimate stands with reality warping abilities, Gamma plus to Omega minus psyker powers, possibly even higher, maybe even near the Emperor's level, chaos magic. If he were to get into that realm of power, he would just be insane. He'd be dumb powerful, basically just a mini chaos god at that point. So when it comes to my final thoughts on the question, how would Ultimate Kars handle the Warhammer 40k universe? Honestly, pretty well. That's mostly due to the fact that his stand hacks are really insane, and the fact that Kars can adapt and get stronger and stronger over time is just basically too overpowered for this universe. And his quest to learn and adapt and grow to things, especially thanks to the warp and chaos gods and psyker powers, he would run amok in this universe. And I think that's all I have to say. So like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, stay hydrated, and I would love to make more of these videos. I love these what ifs and just incorporating story interactions and just overall power scaling. It's honestly dope. So thank you, like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one, ladies and gentlemen. Deuces.